Didn't mangle your, sorry, my name gets mangled all the time, so I kind of feel solidarity here. For many human rights activists in Thailand, the residence of the ambassador has been something of a safe haven for us to discuss freely some of the burning issues confronting human rights defenders in the region and domestically. So, we very much appreciate the support of the Kingdom of Netherlands in opening up the space and providing resources to talk about this very critical issue, Thailand Cybersecurity Act, which is relevant not only to the human rights community and the business community, but the community of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, all the journalists here. So it is my honor to invite the ambassador to share a few remarks.
Well, thank you very much, and indeed it's a pleasure for me to make a few remarks, don't worry, on this very important issue of cybersecurity and especially the human dimension of cybersecurity. Well, of course, this is an extremely important issue for all of us in our daily lives, where you think about social media, when you think about how we pay, how we communicate, in our work, privately, the cyber sphere is becoming more important by the day. And I think it's fair to say that it's fantastic. I mean, it has incredible number of it offers a number of opportunities. It makes life very easy. Some people get very nervous about privacy and so on, and yes, of course, there are issues. But personally, when I Google something and let's say a day later I go on a website and I see that somehow ads come up that have to do with my previous research, well, you can get very nervous about it. I don't mind that much, actually. It makes life much easier. So I think the internet, as long as it's being used in the proper way, is actually an incredible asset that makes all our lives much easier and much more pleasant. Having said that, there are of course also threats, serious threats, be it criminal use of the internet, phishing, bank accounts, you name it, be it of course terrorists, which, let's face it, also make use of the internet, or be it the political use of the internet. So I think it's also very important to be aware of the risks. In the Netherlands, for example, of course, we have many utilities that offer absolutely essential services to the population. I'm talking about the health sector, I'm talking about water, I'm talking about electricity. If these services would be hacked or would be used by criminals, I mean, this could have incredibly devastating consequences. So it is important to be aware of this issue. And actually in April of 2018, we had an example in the Netherlands of what states can do with the internet, because just in front of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, a car was stopped and there were 2 or 3 Russian spies, and they were Russians because we know the identity, part of the Russian Secret Service, who were there in a rental car and who were about to make a hack of the internet of this international organization. So again, that was a very clear example of the risks of the internet that we have to be aware of. And I think it's fair to say that the public sector has been kind of very much had a let it go attitude. The internet has been developed by the private sector, and it's only relatively recently that the public sector has realized, but actually this is something we should also be involved in because of the incredible importance of the internet for the whole of society. And of course, so we are kind of lagging behind, but I think it's fair to say that we are trying to catch up as public sector. Saying a few things about the Netherlands. First of all, why is this an issue that we take very much at heart? Because I think we tend to see ourselves as a digital gateway to Europe because of the incredibly intense internet network we have in the Netherlands in terms of people connected to the internet. Of course, very internationally oriented country, the English language and so on. And this has led to many international companies active on the internet, like Google, like Facebook, to establish data centers in the Netherlands for billions of dollars because they want to make use of that infrastructure that we offer. And actually, we're also slowly emerging as some kind of a center for cybersecurity. And I think we have more than 400 companies that are active in the cybersecurity area. So we try to become kind of a center on this issue that we are also discussing today. And the last reason why this is an important issue for us is that the Netherlands traditionally has this very international focus on legal issues, international legal issues, with The Hague, the international legal capital of the world, and so on. So whenever something is emerging in the international area and there is a legal side to it, we tend to jump in and to see if we cannot contribute something. So what have we done as public sector to try to do something about the internet and especially about the risks? Well, first of all, in the Netherlands, in May of 2018, a law has been adopted to give our intelligence services, our secret services, much more possibilities of intervening doing research, of tapping people, of entering into computers and so on than they had previously. And that again because of the increased risks. But there were quite some people, and actually it's a bit kind of the discussion we are having tonight in Thailand, that also in the Netherlands there were quite some people who said, well, yeah, but you know, this law, it really goes very far and it really gives our secret services very much instruments to basically touch on the privacy of the Dutch citizens. Is this what we want? They started a movement and they were able to collect 300,000 signatures. And with 300,000 signatures, you can ask for a referendum. So a referendum has been organized in the Netherlands, and the question was, are you for or against this law because of these risks? And to the surprise of many, I think it's fair to say, first of all, the people voting was above 50%, and you need that in order for the referendum to be taken into account, because otherwise it's not representative. So more than 50% of the electorate made the effort to vote on this issue, which shows that people find it important. And secondly, a majority rejected the law and said, basically, we don't feel at ease with this law. It goes too far. It's too much invading our private internet environment. So the government had to do something. And what they did three things on that law. And to be honest, listening to the Thai discussion at the moment, that might be a source of inspiration for Thailand as well. First of all, they established an independent commission. And this independent commission is tasked with monitoring the implementation of that law by our intelligence community. And this independent commission is consisting of 3 people, 2 ex-judges, and an independent expert on ICT issues for the technical side of things. So it is really an independent commission, but it's not a judge. So in that sense, it's kind of an in-between solution. But that was what the government decided. Secondly, they decided that if our secret services want to share information on what they find out on the internet with foreign secret services from other countries, they have to check the human rights record of that particular country to avoid that we might share data about human rights defenders and so on with foreign governments, foreign secret services that might then be used to suppress political freedom in another country. So that was the second kind of, let's say, concession to the people who were worried about the privacy issues. And the third one was that journalists are exempted from the law. So the secret services cannot monitor the conversations that journalists have. And again, in view of the discussion in Thailand, I think these are all 3 of them actually quite interesting elements. So this is what the Netherlands has done. And then, of course, also the international community has done, well, is starting to do a lot of things. Just to name 3, the EU, of course, is also very actively looking at this issue. And you know about the huge fines for Google, for Amazon and so on because of monopoly, because of sharing private information. And we're talking about billions and billions of fines. So this is really, they really took it head on. And as we speak, this fight is going on. So Brussels is really trying to do something about this, about the monopoly especially. Secondly, the UN, and actually 2 weeks ago, the first meeting took place of an open-ended working group on cybers. This is an intergovernmental forum that is going to discuss some kind of a framework for how states, it's really addressing the state-to-state relations, how states will act together in terms of doing something about this internet. It's all at the beginning. It was a Russian initiative, which is already quite interesting. But anyway, this discussion is really taking off now. Will take years before they agree on something. But just to say that also in the UN framework, there is a realization we cannot just let this internet go on like that. We really have to do something about it. And then the third one is that we have, especially as Netherlands, initiated all kinds of international fora on the freedom on the internet. And in 2011, we have organized a conference on the Freedom Online Conference. And that has led to the creation of a Freedom Online Coalition. And at the moment, I think a bit more than 30 countries are member of that Freedom Online Coalition. And these are countries that really believe, and that's also a strong belief we have with many like-minded countries, that yes, monitoring the internet because of risks to the security of the state, okay, we understand. Doing something about the internet in terms of doing something about criminal behavior on the internet, yes, we understand. But we very strongly believe that if you do that, you should do that taking the privacy of the citizens as your absolute first priority. And from there on, you can look at security issues, you can look at criminal issues, but what should always come first is the privacy of citizens and also the political possibility for citizens to express their opinions. And this is absolutely essential for us. And unfortunately, especially in this part of the world, we've seen recently that some states are really using all these instruments we have in terms of monitoring the internet to basically do exactly just that, which is limit the freedom of their citizens to express themselves, to rally like we saw in Hong Kong and so on. I mean, it's really being used for many political movements, but in certain countries, especially in this part of the world, unfortunately, this is being used in a way we are very much afraid of, to what it might lead to ultimately. Then concluding about Thailand, we were very happy and very honored to have been able to host a meeting of experts on the 9th of May of this year. I think basically the organization is organizing tonight to discuss all these issues. And we are very grateful to the Manushya, of course, to Manushya Foundation, to the Thai Netizen Network, Access Now, International Federation for Human Rights, for all these groups that are in Thailand doing what we think is very, very important, as I said, that is really making sure that the cybersecurity that this issue is not being used by the public sector to kind of restrict the freedom of expression on the internet. Again, this was a meeting on the 9th of May, and I think the agreement was made then to try to formulate recommendations for the Thai Cybersecurity Act. And to be honest, I'm as curious as you are probably to hear what their findings are and to see how we can indeed make sure that this law is used what it's supposed to be, which is go against threats to the state or criminal activities, but is not being used in a too political way. So I'm very curious to listen to you. And again, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make a few remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So my duty as moderator, he did some of my duty by talking about the fact that this event is put together, kindly hosted by the FCCT, which is second home to many of us, and the Thai Netizen Network, Access Now, Manushya Foundation, and FIDH. And in fact, it's to launch this report, this study, Thailand's Cybersecurity Act, towards a human-centered act protecting online freedom and privacy while tackling cyber threats. And of course, there's the more sexy companion piece, which is Thailand's Cybersecurity Act do's and don'ts. So you've got to read either one of these within the next 24 hours and get yourself informed. And the culprit, the person who actually started this whole process, is Emily Pradicit, the founder and director of Manushya Foundation. So Emily will explain a little bit about how this study came about. And I think you have to, yes.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the launch of our study on Thailand Cybersecurity Act towards the Human Sector Act. So we would like to sincerely thank all the people who made this study possible. First of all, we'd like to thank the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands for your generous support, but also all the experts, the legal, technical experts that we have been working with from civil society, from the private sector, Access Now, Thai Netizen Network, FIDH, but also Asia Internet Coalition, who is also here, and political parties like Future Forward Party and Dr. Boom from the government side who joined us at the expert meeting. So thank you very much for your contribution and for making this study possible. In terms of the background of the study, why we came up with the study was very simple. There's an increased number of cybersecurity acts that are being proposed in the region, in the ASEAN region, as we all know. And most of these acts are not necessarily following the good practices that the ambassador has briefly presented earlier, but most of these acts are actually, there's a huge concern among civil society organizations and the ITC sector that these acts are actually violating online freedom and the right to privacy of netizens. So it was really important for us to come together to create a safe space for discussion, and thanks to the Netherlands Embassy, we were able to discuss the Cybersecurity Act back in April 2019, where we were able to identify key challenges that are outlined in the study. And we were able also to discuss amendments and recommendations towards the Act. So what we found out was that when we are working with civil society and legal experts on the ground, we realized that the Act is actually not targeting human security, but it's basically towards protecting the state interest in Thailand. And so we decided to provide an in-depth analysis of the Act that you will be able to download by scanning the QR code here. And you will also be able to access the do's and don'ts with the same code. In the study, you will be able to see the 6 challenges that we have identified. The first one being, of course, the lack of specific definition and the fact that the Act is not in line with international human rights standards. In the do's and don'ts, you will be able to see what we think the Thai government should do and should not do when it comes to the Cybersecurity Act. What we also found out when we worked on the Act is that this is the first of its kind in the region. So this is the first time that groups are coming together to develop an analysis of a Cybersecurity Act. And we hope that this type of study and this type of work will also inspire our partners in other countries to look into the Cybersecurity Act in their own country. And when it comes to the Thai context, we believe that the study is very timely for several reasons. The first one is because we have until May 2020 before there is a royal decree that is going to detail the implementation of the Act. So we have from now until May 2020 to push the Thai government to have a better Act and to have a clear implementation plan and monitoring for the Cybersecurity Act. The second reason why the study comes timely is because, as you know, Thailand is the chair of the ASEAN right now, and Thailand has put cybersecurity as one of its key priority. So Thailand will have the power actually to influence its neighbor countries. So if the Cybersecurity Act is actually being misused to restrict our freedom of expression online, there is a risk that neighbors will do exactly the same. So the study is really important while Thailand is the chairman of ASEAN, because we want the Thai government to actually give us answers in terms of why is this bill not protecting individual rights. And the third reason why the study comes timely is because now we have a new government and we also have a new National Legislative Assembly. And so we hope that for political parties will use our study because we provide direct amendments to the text of the study to ensure that it is in line with international human rights standards. And we will close the event with actually a representative from one political party to hear what they expect to do with the study, but also their position when it comes to the Cybersecurity Act. So we hope that you will find the study helpful in your work and that you will join our campaign to amend the Cybersecurity Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. So, basically, this evening we're going to have a series of 2 speakers at a time with me at the table, and then after they've spoken and there's a burning question answered, they will have to leave, and the next round of speakers will come on board. It's essentially the FCCT moderator's version of a speed date. And so, guys, you're not going to have 15 minutes each. It's a speed date. So basically, it's like 5 minutes, you know. And now we come to the first session, which is talking about the scope and challenges of the National Cybersecurity Act, which I would like to dub as the cage fight. Because who are we speaking with this session? We have, hang on. Okay, I need to know the blue corner and the red corner. So on my right is Dr. Bhumi Ratana, one of the people who helped draft the National Cybersecurity Act. He is also a committee. He has many positions. But he's besides contributing to the drafting process, he's also committee member of the National Cybersecurity Preparedness Committee. So please come to the table, and ladies and gentlemen, on my left we have Mr. Artit Suryawonkol, coordinator of the Thai Netizen Network, who obviously have a slightly different or I think almost diametrically opposite position to Dr. Boom. And so let's start. 5 minutes, Dr. Boom. What are the top 3 things you like about this act?
Hello. Okay. So that was quite dramatic. I have to disappoint you, but Art and I have been colleagues for a long time. Actually, we're not exactly going to fight. We disagree on a lot of things, but we'll fight occasionally, but probably not right here. What I like the most about this law is the fact that it exists. So to me, it shows progress. We spend so much time talking about moving country forward, and finally we actually manage to make a step. You know, some might argue it's not a full step. Some might argue it's a step backward. Some might argue it's a step sideways. To me, it's a small step forward. I didn't get everything that I want in the law, and I couldn't fight off all the things I don't want from entering the law. But I look at the end result and I think it's livable. Okay. So that's number 1 thing that I like about the law. Number 2 is that the core concept of it is reasonable. Yeah. We didn't set out to draft a law to do something too big. Right? We only want to define a list of important organizations and then work toward protecting them. Right? That's the goal. Right? So basically, the law revolves around defining what CII is, and then give government authority and responsibility to protect them. So that I consider a success, because at some point during the drafting of the law, it was trying to be dragged into something much more broad. For example, trying to protect everyone in the country, which I don't think government is capable of, all the way to creating, bringing in things like technology regulation as part of the law. That would be way ahead of everyone else in the world, where, as in most countries, already had that debate, like anti-encryption law, anti-platform law, and things like that, and already decided that it's not quite the time for the world to do things like that yet, as most government don't quite understand the technology. So we managed to beat most of those back and keep the scope just protecting the important stuff, right? And the last thing I like about the law is the fact that it is one of the first law drafted by the government that actually try to implement what we call separation of power. So there's a committee that does the policy, and then there's an entirely separate committee that does the enforcement, and then there's an entirely separate committee that does handle the day-to-day operation of the organization. So it's a good concept. Unfortunately, there are lots of overlaps among the appointed seats, but at least it's a good concept, and all three committees have roles to play that, had them be somewhat independent from one another a little bit more than what they are now, it would be even better. But at least it's not the same entity. So to me, the frame is reasonable. The scope is reasonable, and the way the government set out to do it is also fairly reasonable. It's not perfect by any means, but working with the government for several years. Oh, by the way, during the introduction, I was introduced as from the government. I'm as far away as being from the government as anyone in this room is. I don't work for the government. I advise them occasionally for no pay, as in someone in the government occasionally listen to what I say and therefore ring my phone and ask for my opinion, but that's about it, right? I'm as close to the government as basically that, right? I don't take money from them, and I don't defend them, and I'm not trying to defend the law, right? I'm just stating my academic opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Boom. And now we have Art from the Thai Netizen Network, who is going to say the top 3 things that make him uncomfortable about this act.
Okay.
Did I put words in your mouth? You actually love the act?
No.
Because I'm getting confused
no.
because Dr. Boom will help draft the act saying, yeah, actually there's some things that I don't feel completely comfortable with, and then...
Okay, so also I think I can put it in this way. I think like the protection of the information security, network security is a necessity, right? For the protection of civil rights, right? Us all, right? So I think like the idea, right, to have like some mechanism, right, to make the whether it's the authority, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the individuals, to be able to protect themselves or the people that they have to taking care of, right? With this like, the protection of the information of the network is like, I think I buy the idea, right? I think I glad like in the sense like maybe replicate the thing that like Dr. Poom says that like he happy, right, to see this like exist, right, in the first place, right? So I think like kind of agree in that, right? But to like welcome the whole act, that's a different thing, right? That's a different thing. Like for example, I think like when it comes to like the committee itself, right? I think like yes, like we try to read the law as Dr. Poom and a lot of like supporter of the acts, right, trying to make us believe that like actually a separation of powers, right? But like and it's actually practically exactly as Kun Poom said it, right? By actually, and I think this is actually not the, how to say, like the weak point, right? The weak point here is not very specific to the Cybersecurity Act itself, right? It is actually very common to a lot of committees that got appointed or selected in a lot of laws here in Thailand, right? Basically, the concept of how they call it, ex officio, right? Members, like or ex officios, like directors, basically, right? It's making the separation of power. It's like more and more like practically not, practically impossible, basically, right? Because like every now and then you're going to have like this permanent secretary of that minister to be appointed, right? Or in this committee, in that committee, right? And a lot of times these committees, right, that in principle, right? Say for example, we talking about, let's say like the cybersecurity National Cybersecurity Committee, right, on one hand, and we're talking about, like, on the other hand, we have like the Data Protection Committee, right? Some of the by the concept, right, if there's a privacy violation from the implementation of the Cybersecurity Act, right, in principle, the privacy committee, the data protection committee should work somehow, right, to balance that kind of power. Unfortunately, by the concept of like appointing ex officio like members to these two committees as well, right, some of the people actually work for both committees. So I think like by design, this problem actually not very specific to Cybersecurity Act. I mean, Cybersecurity Act actually has this problem, but this problem is actually very pervasive, right? So in terms of separation of power, I think like we can actually ask this question to a lot of laws, a lot of acts here in Thailand.
So basically, you're saying there's no effective firewall when it comes to the separation of powers. Because you have one program that skips across all.
I think that's the problem in general. I think like, but to go to the second point, more interestingly, we I think like in the past, actually also the process of actually drafting the, for example, Data Protection Act, right, or the Cybersecurity Act has been around for a long time. I think it's actually more than 10 years, like through different governments, right, and a lot of times the governments, like the lawmakers, try to make us believe that they're going to be like a system of like check and balance, right. But then if you're actually looking not only to this Cybersecurity Act, right, you're also looking at the Personal Data Protection Act, right, which is actually got enacted actually the same day, right, like 27th of May this year. At the Section 4 of PDPA, this like Personal Data Protection Act, right, you see the big exemption, right, right there in Section 4, right. So it's in Section 4, right, there are actually like many subsection. And at the subsection 2 of Section 4, it's actually talking about you actually smiling. Okay. No, I'm not trying to like anything with you.
Is that a happy smile or angry smile?
No. Not really happy about. Anyway, like if you look at the subsection 2, right, of the Section 4 in PDPA, it's actually said that like the whole activities of cybersecurity protection, right, will be got exempted from the protection of privacy, right. So the lawmaker make us believe for a long time like, oh, there will be different stuff, right. We're going to have like the Computer Crime Act, right, which may somehow has to use some power, and it may violate, like in some circumstances, it may violate the civil rights, right. We will have the Cybersecurity Act, right, which in some circumstance, like a limited circumstance, right, it may violate civil rights. But don't worry, we're going to have the Data Protection Act, right, and all these like apparatus, like the committee agency. But in the end, right, with this Section 4 in PDPA, right, the whole activity of Cybersecurity Act got exempted from the protection of privacy. So I think that's so I mean when you read the act, right, you shouldn't read only Cybersecurity Act, right, you should read other acts like that work together with this act as well. So I think that's the second thing that I actually like worry about, because in the end the safeguard that we believe that's going to be in place is actually not there anymore, right. And I think like back to, okay, you asked me the three things, right? Maybe the last one is the specificity, right? I mean how to actually like make things more in particular, right, and not that too broad, right? So I think if you look at for example, like Section 60, right, when you're talking about like what are the cyber threats that going to be considered, right, that like illegal or needs to have some intervention, right, in this law. Most of the time they're talking about the protection of the critical information infrastructure, right, which is good, right. We need some thing that very specific like that, right. But unfortunately at the very last bit of this Section 60, right, which is the subsection 3B, it doesn't actually talking about the infrastructure itself, right? It's actually anything, right, that could be considered a threat to the cybersecurity. So I think I still think that like this is the act that can be amended for the better, right? The framework itself looks good, right? It's not like the entire, basically like, to use the root word, like it's not the entire like shit, right? I mean, it's something workable. It is something workable. But with these loopholes, I think like we actually have a very, very legitimate reason to worry about, because most of the times the violations in terms of like human rights violation is come from all these loopholes.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So Art is reminding us that we have to read the Cybersecurity Act, the impact or the effect, the combined effect of the Cybersecurity Act in the context also of the Personal Data Protection Act and the Computer Crime Act, and that all these safeguards that look good on paper may not be necessarily there, may actually be a mirage because of the operation of all the clauses in all these three acts. I'm very happy to note that he said that there are good parts to the act. So I hope that's a not stressed out smile. But you know, as a human rights activist, I've been working on human rights in Southeast Asia for 32 years, actually since I was in kindergarten. There has always been this trend or tradition that the governments in our region will come out with a very positive sounding law, like the freedom of assembly law. But actually when they implement the law, it's to stop freedom of assembly. So what do you think needs to happen for the Cybersecurity Act to really protect cybersecurity, particularly in the context of human rights, in the context of the human users of the technology? What do you think needs to happen? I think we've had the issue of the separation of powers, which they're not really separate. Because there's a lot of backdoors in the form of ex-officio members floating, the permanent, like a permanent secretary floating in between the various so-called independent and separate committees, and then also the fact that the combination of these three laws actually kind of negate those safeguards that were supposed to be incorporated into the Act. So if you could redraft, or you could draft amendments to the law, what would be your prime target?
Well, that's broad and a tall order, but you know, first thing is I would take out Clause 4 from PDPA Act entirely. I disagree from the very first moment that clause was introduced, because there's no one that should be exempted from protecting rights online, right? I mean, and in fact, in reality, the law was this close to having Clause 4 taken out. In fact, it left the committee in the Parliament and the National Legislative Assembly to enter the second assembly without Clause 4, but then there's just one person who decides to raise his hand in the assembly and says, why did you take out that section and throw the entire thing back in? And the person has never participated in the process draft of the law. Such is the way an assembly works, and I don't think it would have been any different whether that was appointed by the military junta or democratically elected, right? We're going to run into instance where representative, be it democratically elected or not, don't quite understand the law and think certain phrase should be there. We see so many of that in so many other laws. I try not to fault anyone, right? So to me, all of these little things to me are basically challenges and problem we have to overcome. So I just happen to be that kind of person where I try not to fault and figure out, what if scenario, right? I just work with whatever I have. So there are several, so all that was to say, there are several places in the law that I would fix. I would remove some words, I would change some words, but I tried, and many of us tried, and we got half of what we want, and the other half got jumbled up by something else, and we sort of have to live with it. Assuming the law is what it is, and if we can't amend it, I think it's still livable. All three laws, well, not Computer Crime Act. Computer Crime Act really need to be amended, but Data Protection Act and Cybersecurity Act, we can sort of live with it.
When you say we, you mean the advisors or the users?
I think most people in the country can live with it. There are some limitation to the law, but I don't think it's that harmful right now. It could be the problem with both law, Data Protection Act and Cybersecurity Act, is it's not written sharp enough that it becomes a blunt tool for the bureaucrats and the politicians to use. And so my suggestion is that we need to work towards sharpening that tool, right? Both law happens to work with a structure of setting up some kind of committee, and in that committee sort of make more elaborate announcement that details how they're going to use the power. And I recently looked at the body of both committees, and I just realized that more than half of all these committees are controllable by the people, meaning only a little bit of them are bureaucrats, people who are not accounted to the people directly at all, right? I mean, everyone else is either politicians or appointed by politicians, right? So then we are in the democratically elected government right now, so we have to then go to the politicians. Right now, the said politician is Minister of Digital Economy, and he has expressed very strong intent to make both sets of committees, because each law has multiple committees, right? So both sets of committees as good as possible. So there are some hope at the end of this tunnel, the first tunnel anyway, meaning appointing of these committees. These committees, it's been beyond 90 days. It's been at like 115 days, almost 120 days. It will be 120 days in like 4 days or 5 days. So we're well past time to set up the committee, but the minister has committed to appoint good experts and not people from politics and not people from. I mean, there are words he said to me like he wants someone young, someone reasonable, who understands technology, who's not been in these positions for too long, meaning being in one of these committees for too much, so that they can bring in outside perspective, and he wants to appoint those people. So once we appoint these committee with a good mix of experts, all the power that's a little bit blunt can be sharpened, right? So that's my best recommendation. Besides, amending the law, like whatever this report suggests, all the little details. That's one shorter way to do it, that we can start working on that. In fact, my recommendation to everyone for the past couple of months is start thinking about what you want these committees to say, because these committees are going to be brand new. They're going to show up one day and they're not going to know what to do, and you should bombard them with recommendations, and they're going to pick up some, and they're not going to go back and draft everything anew. That for sure.
Thank you. So we have a few steps forward, and I noticed that Dr. Boom said right now quite clearly twice, so he's trying to drive us to right now action. So finally, final words. Do you have anything else? You agree?
So I think that kind of like opportunity here as well, right? So I think like how many months we have until like maybe 8 months, right? And I think by law, right? I mean, what's said in the law that like.
Hang on. Cybersecurity Act is in full effect right now. It's Data Protection Act that becomes in full effect in May, but Cybersecurity Act.
Sure. But like I mean, Cybersecurity Act already in full effect, but also like in the act it say that like there should be either like royal decree or ministerial announcement, right, to be announced additionally, right? I think that's the thing that like will happen after those committee got selected and appointed, right? So I think this is the opportunity that to actually influence somehow, right? So I think like the things that from this forum, for example, right, can use as recommendation. Also, I think like in the parliament itself, right, there are different committees, right, that may not directly related to the Cybersecurity Act, right, but because the scope of Cybersecurity Act itself, right, actually like go like to transportation, to the defense, to a lot of like area, right? So I think like those parliamentary committee, right, can actually somehow use their power, right, to give some recommendation to this committee as well. So I think that's the way, and I think that's kind of mechanism that we more or less, right, through the political parties has access to.
Okay, thanks. That was very enlightening because I'm actually not an expert and not young, so I've been on too many committees, so I'm obviously not eligible. But short of, since we can't do the Avengers Endgame thing and go back into time and collect the Infinity Stones and get rid of all 3 laws or get the laws redrafted, we have 2 options now at our hands. One is using the space between 3 options. One, using the space between now and the declaration of royal decrees on how to on the specific implementation enforcement of the act. Actually going to the committees, trying to influence the selection of committee members of the 3 committees, which are not really that independent of each other, but still we'll work with that. And also thinking laterally and looking at committees of other ministries who have to interact with the cybersecurity law. So we have some steps forward, not quite the referendum model, the ideal referendum model of the Netherlands, but we're going to stop here and move to the next panel. Are there any burning questions for this panel seeking clarification? No interventions from the floor, just clarification questions. No? You've been sufficiently impressed, enlightened, and excited to go to the next panel? Thank you. So please thank Dr. Boom and Art. Even though there was no cage fight and chair throwing, it was still very exciting. Thank you. So now we're going to go into session 2. Which is good practices on cybersecurity legislation, looking on the impact of netizens and civil society and impact on the information technology sector. So business and civil society. So I'd like to invite, Ramanjit Singh Chima, the Asia Policy Director and Senior International Counsel at Access Now, and he's leading the organization's work in protecting an open internet and advancing the rights of users at risk across the region. And we have Mr. Jeff Payne, Managing Director of the Asia Internet Coalition. So he works with companies that use the internet, that are internet companies, internet-based companies. So we are going to have a equally short and sweet session because we are trying to catch up time. And I'm going to ask Raman to start very briefly on how you see cybersecurity legislation impacting on netizens and civil society, and what would your concerns be, particularly in the context of the Thailand Cybersecurity Act?
Sure.
You do not have 15 minutes.
I don't have 15 minutes. Good to know. That the first thing about the impact of any cybersecurity legislation or even policy on your everyday conversations or your digital activities is the fact that firstly what cybersecurity means or what cyber means is often taken to be very broad. You poll people in this room, you'll probably have 15, 20 different interpretations of what is cybersecurity or relevant to cybersecurity. Sometimes that's a good thing. The internet has now become mainstream. Everything you do in your everyday life, even those who are often disconnected, still have some sort of online footprint. But what that also means is that what would sometimes be a technical subject about protecting and securing your networks and your devices becomes a conversation about much larger matters. And what I mean by that, for example, is the objective of most cybersecurity professionals, and I don't necessarily regard myself as one of those people. We have enthusiastic discussions around cybersecurity policy here. I'm a policy person, so I'm one of those enthusiastic people. I talk about the impact it has on social and legal impact. But the people who secure your computers, secure your networks, you ask them what it means is that we want to prevent someone from doing something with your device that you don't want other people to do. You want to know if you have a phone with you that it's not been hacked, it's not been compromised. If you're using the Wi-Fi here, there's not some malicious third party or fourth party looking at what's happening there. Now the problem is, and it's a relevant conversation, cyber policy is much broader. It can sometimes be data protection. It could be other issues, even about online speech. And therefore we need to be very focused when we look at cybersecurity. The relevant point there is that most cybersecurity conversations, whether they're global ones, including what the ambassador to the Netherlands mentioned, many of the UN discussions on cybersecurity happening today and which will be happening in December, and my organization's involved in some of those discussions, or national conversations like Thailand's current Cybersecurity Act, Bangladesh's Digital Security Act, cybersecurity proposals for new laws in countries such as Sri Lanka, or reforms to policies in countries such as India, or existing institutional frameworks in countries like Australia or Japan. They impact your core rights, particularly around your right to free speech and your right to privacy. And these aren't rights that I would say often vary from country to country. I put that to provoke you, because the UN General Assembly, a body not known for having agreement on issues, has agreed, for example, that the right to free speech applies online and has talked about internet freedom in multiple resolutions, so has the UN Human Rights Council. The UNGA has also talked about the right to privacy in a digital age. Perhaps well-timed, as some of you might be buying Snowden's book. That resolution was prompted by the Snowden revelations, but it talked about what rights you have there as well. And what I want you to just think about a little bit in terms of these national conversations is how are your rights being impacted? My organization's main work, the work that I'm most proud of, is the fact that it runs a digital security helpline. That helpline helps activists, journalists, others at risk in terms of the threats they face. And what they see today is that the threats on cybersecurity is the fact, firstly, that you see every day more cyber attacks in a more intense manner than ever seen before. Over the last 5 years, there's been a massive increase in the number of cyber intrusion attacks by bad actors, by other parties, by nation states themselves. And national governments have sometimes made this worse. What has happened instead is there's been a growth of vulnerabilities. That means hoarding of, for example, what I call zero-day exploits, ways to crack your operating system, ways to crack your mobile phone. There has been hoarding of attack capabilities between national governments, and there's increased government hacking, often under the grounds of saying we want access to data for surveillance purposes. May seem legitimate, but it actually weakens our cybersecurity. And what that's resulted in is a more insecure network for everyone. And what I leave to you, and I'm going to build upon this a bit more as we talk because I'm conscious of the time, is think about what sort of cybersecurity frameworks actually result in more open, secure communications. The framework that my organization uses is twofold. One, we say at a broad top level, we want to ensure access to an open, secure global internet for everyone. But notice those words, open, secure, global. It is really the core of the internet that we want it to be a global communications medium, one where you can share and post and talk freely, but also create new innovative things. Be accountable for them as well, including if you have data breaches. Sometimes I disagree with companies on their approaches to that for sure. But one that's secure, where you can communicate to someone privately, including sometimes perhaps even from government actors if you want your private space. The other thing we say for cybersecurity frameworks is we say they should be user-centric. And I welcome the very framing of the discussion itself, right? So we have a three-part test. It should be user-centric, it should be systemic, and it should be an outproduct or byproduct of open, democratic, pluralistic processes. What that means, again, and I won't talk about a human rights focused approach to the internet. when it's systemic, you want effective institutions. You want an institutional framework that works. It's not about interventions. It's not about, as the previous discussion mentioned, a legacy office continuing with the same powers. These are very common issues across the entire Asian region, by the way, and I'll talk about that later. But you also want it to be an output of an open democratic process, and one where certain actors aren't always privileged. But what I leave you with is, if you want a human-centric approach to cybersecurity, it also, as a cybersecurity professional or government, you do need to recognize that protecting the right to free speech online and the right to privacy online is also a critical element of protecting cybersecurity. It really does not, they're not oppositional, they have to go hand in hand. And sometimes in these conversations we forget that. I'm going to leave that to provoke you and then come to this more later.
Thank you, Raman. So it's sobering that we're actually seeing a rise in cyber attacks, and that some of the perpetrators of cyber attacks are actually nation states themselves, which then raises the question that unilaterally drafted cybersecurity laws is like expecting the fox to look after the chickens. And when we talk about cybersecurity as the outcome of a democratic process, that also involves the private sector. And we are now in a region where the growth of e-commerce is exponential. And then we now have a community, a business community, facing some uncertainty over the cybersecurity laws, both in Thailand, in Vietnam, and now being proposed in Cambodia. So, Jeff, as the private sector specialist here, would such cybersecurity laws be an incentive, provide a feeling of security that companies can do business without losing income and losing data, or is it a deterrent?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I think that business likes to operate in a certain environment. So cybersecurity, unfortunately for us, is only a small sliver of the world that we've been living in. I've heard a few different kinds of policy issues that we've been grappling with in the digital economy in a very diverse region like ASEAN, but also in places like Australia, which tend to create these policies that infiltrate their ways up north. So I do think that cybersecurity laws are just one set of laws that people like to have a good understanding of. So business want to invest where they are certain of the environment that they'll be working in. I do want to thank the Manushya Foundation for this study, the event in May, and then this follow-up study to help with the implementation guidelines. This is super important. Unfortunately, Dr. Boom has left, but I do think there's a lot of great opportunities to help work on the government around the implementation regulations. A lot of these laws are passed, but a lot of the devil is in the details, and that devil in the details is really developed after the laws have been passed. As Dr. Boom had mentioned, many of these committees will have people that don't really have a full set of experience. They're new to the committee. So it's a great opportunity for you still to share. And I think this study that is being released tonight is a really great initiative. And I have to say, because we do work on cybersecurity laws in other places like Vietnam, we don't, even though tons and tons of people have submitted suggestions on how to implement the law on cybersecurity in Vietnam, I haven't seen this formal of as approach as we have here. So congratulations to you. And to the ambassador, I want to say thank you for helping with all of this, because I think I was at the event earlier in May. I thought it was a great collaboration of industry and people in the civil society organizations. You talked about the shift from the private sector to the public sector. This is not only happening in cybersecurity, it's happening across the board as more and more the economy becomes digital. And now they're starting to say that it's not even digital economy anymore, it's just like the economy is digital. This is raising all kinds of issues around taxation, cross-border data flows. Of course, data privacy has been very big since GDPR, and cybersecurity. I do have to say that as Asia Internet Coalition, we represent 14 big technology companies. We've been under so much firefighting in the last year and a half that I feel like I need a vacation. So it's good to be here in Thailand. But I do think there's a lot of uncertainty, not only here in Thailand for the government, I would say globally. We can look over at France. France has implemented a 3% digital taxation on revenue earned by digital platforms in France. There's a lot of problems with that. One, it's unilateral and it goes against all the efforts that have been put into the OECD BEPS process on taxation. But two, because it's unilateral, you may get other actors in the world starting to follow suit. You mentioned e-commerce. E-commerce, I think the reason why the shift is happening from private sector to public sector is it's becoming more of the economy, and that's where a lot of the revenue, I can tell you the tax authorities in Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam have been hunting for tax revenues. And that's built up into e-commerce laws. And I think one of the key challenges with laws on e-commerce or cybersecurity is they come out with an idea like this is what we're trying to achieve, but then they start lumping a bunch of other things underneath this. And I think with respect to Thailand's cybersecurity law, it's similar to Vietnam. It's okay, well, here we want to have a safe online environment for our citizens to operate in. However, we're going to have access to content control. We're going to have access without legal kind of representation to your data and information. And I think that's some of the challenges that we had. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but...
Oh, no, I was just gonna, that's a good opening point, and that's the second round that I wanted to ask you, because now what's happening from both sides, civil society and from business, private sector, I'm seeing a whole bunch of memes in my head between reality, expectation and reality. So if you had to make a meme, of expectation and reality when it comes to cybersecurity, what would your meme look like?
The meme probably would be two images, right? There'll be one image of saying, what do you expect cybersecurity to be? Really serious looking professionals, small team, an organization with network computing, thinking this is cybersecurity. And the reality instead is normally whether it's government people or even sometimes civil society people in conference rooms or whatever saying cyber everything. Okay. The idea that there's a threat, but without knowing what the threat is and responding to that. So that's like the sort of reality, right? You imagine Mr. Robot on one hand, on the other hand, what you actually end up with is a yes minister for those who follow TV, right? Okay. It's something where it becomes a conversation about civil service and policy and politics. And that's a little bit dangerous because I keep reminding cybersecurity people, you need to talk to the politicians and you need to talk to elected representatives. It's critical. On the other hand, you really need to understand what the one word they use, which is very good, is calling what are your threat vectors? What is your ecosystem? For example, for Thailand, what is the purpose of a cybersecurity law? Or even the policy framework? Who may be attacking Thai citizens or Thai online platforms? What are the sort of crime or attacks people are facing? How do you better protect that? And then how do you involve people in that process? For example, as a civil society person, I'd note an economic harm of bad cybersecurity laws. Bad cybersecurity laws means that the young people and the others who actually do cybersecurity work, the ones who are actually coding, not talking about coding like I might, but who are actually defending this, they will not come and talk and work with their governments. Firstly, the reality is if it's a badly crafted law, they may not know who to talk to. And this is not this is an issue across the region. In fact, I would say my home country, I'm an Indian citizen. India has a very complicated, in fact, excessively statist approach to cybersecurity, which is not always effective. Because the best people in Bangalore and Hyderabad end up working for other countries or other companies rather than their own. And the other factor I'd leave you with is that often, and anyone who works with cybersecurity people, and they're essentially hackers, right? If you tell a hacker you want to work with a government agency that is also trying to censor, control speech or access communications, you won't get the best ones. You will get people there, people perhaps who you should not trust with access to state resources, but you won't get the really important patriotic people often who want to have their societies flourish because they tend to believe in the idea of an open internet. So that's a sort of economic and I won't say infrastructure, but national interest harm you suffer.
Okay, so Jeff, expect the meme. What is your meme going to look like?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
I asked you a difficult question in May, which was what was your first internet experience? But I'm now asking you a difficult question, as in, what would your expectation versus reality meme look like in terms of the cybersecurity law?
Well, I don't know. I think a few things that come to mind are one, as I mentioned, the shift into the private to public sector is because there's so much economic activity moving online. So that's one thing. So I'm drawing this meme as I say this. But the other thing too, really, that I've noticed is a lot of the regulations on privacy and cybersecurity come out pre-election. And nowhere is this clearer than in my home that I currently live in Singapore. Actually, when I was here for the event in May, for the Cybersecurity Thailand event, everyone wanted to talk about the fake news law in Singapore. But I have to say that in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Singapore, we had a very big push by governments to look at content-related laws, sometimes hidden under the umbrella of cybersecurity. So maybe my mem would have an umbrella in it. I do agree with Dr. Boom. If I had to say some good things about the cybersecurity law here in Thailand, first, we commend the government for looking into it. A lot of this is new to a lot of governments all over the world. Vietnam also had a law on cybersecurity, which it's actually currently in effect, and the implementation regulations are up in the air. So when you talk about business certainty, it's totally not there in Vietnam, and they've had a lot of people provide technical and industry and all types of feedback on their implementation regulations. So I think that's a big challenge, and I really think that Thailand has an opportunity to actually do a better job. They are chair of ASEAN. They'll be passing the torch to Vietnam next year, and Vietnam is a country where the Prime Minister is very focused on leveraging Industry 4.0 to help support their economy. Unfortunately, that was announced in April 2018, and then the cybersecurity law came along in June. But I think it's something where we have the opportunity to continue working with governments and sharing our opinions, whether it be from civil society or industry perspective, and we'll continue to do that as long as people will listen to us.
So Jeff, you're basically implying or gently hinting that some of the cybersecurity laws are basically cement shoes around the Industrial Revolution 4.0.
Well, no, I think that that's important. If you're going to talk about so everyone has a plan. Thailand has Thailand 4.0. Vietnam has Industrial Revolution 4.0. They all have fancy names, most of them 4.0. But at the end of the day, if you want to move your economy online, so when we had the discussion with Prime Minister Phuc from Vietnam, we were talking about some of the issues they had with legislation that's already on the books that had data localization provisions. But if you look at Industrial Revolution 4.0, a huge part of that is through cloud. And cloud service providers are not going to go start building billion-dollar data centers in every country they operate. It just kind of kills the business model. So that's why I think it's great that Thailand has a cybersecurity law. It's just a matter of making it work. And some of the times people come up with laws and that they're not implementable at all. This year we had an e-commerce law that was announced in Indonesia, which was about to take effect on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day. But they actually canceled it on the Friday before that day because they didn't know how to implement it. You've also seen similar activities here in Thailand around e-commerce, right? The revenue department is looking how, if everyone's starting to sell more and more things online, how do we get our share of tax? And they came up, the Bank of Thailand has to get a report now if you get a certain number of transactions or a certain dollar amount in your account, you have to register. So I think they're doing lots of things, as are many governments around the world. But again, it's continuing to work with industry is where you're not going to miss out on the edge of innovation.
And for business to function, continue to have confidence of customers, they need to be able to protect the data, the privacy of data of their customers. How far? And I'm talking about we're just talking about. Although the evening is about the Thailand cybersecurity law, it's quite clear, since we are very focused on an ASEAN economic community, and that e-commerce and all of this stuff actually has an impact. Like, how do you guarantee protection of data? as a company, how do you protect the data of the privacy of your customers if cybersecurity laws are so poorly drafted that data that travels from over a national boundary might actually be at risk?
Well, I think people look at data breaches as a breach on their reputation, right? So nobody wants to have a data breach. There's a financial penalty to it in some cases, but it's the loss of face in the media that people are kind of worried about. And that's one of the issues that we had with the law, was that you had to report breaches, but it was not really giving enough time to do internal investigations, because you don't want to come out and start reporting things, and that could create issues where there's not really an issue out there. So I think people invest a lot of money in protecting data. I know, if you look at cloud service providers, they spend a lot of money on data security, physical security for their data centers and things like that. So I think not only technology companies, I think all companies now are focused on that, on cybersecurity.
Okay, so basically, cybersecurity, Raman is advocating for a user-centric, systemic cybersecurity regime, which is a result of open democratic process where all stakeholders are able to do that, and on the basis of this is the freedom of expression and privacy of the user is paramount. If not, even the experts the coders who can even help ensure that implementation and the law is elegant and straightforward and implementable enough, they're not going to come forward because they don't trust the process. And on the other hand, business needs to have certainty, and in both sides we need to have law that is fit for purpose, the law which is actually drafted for the purpose of protect cybersecurity and not of stifling freedom of expression, free flow of information and services, or for the purposes of revenue collection. All right, thank you very much, Raman, and thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No burning questions? Going, gone. Okay, next date. This is the final part of the speed date. Session 3 is on basically the National Cybersecurity Act of Thailand itself, amendments, recommendations, and the way forward. Now, Raman, Jeff, and Art also talked about the need to ensure that the politicians who have to be accountable for legislation actually know their shit. They have a good understanding of the technology itself, and it's my pleasure that Klaikong is here. Klaitong Vadiakan is actually, I've known him for 10 years, and when I met him, he was an IT specialist. So he assures me that there are 6 parliamentarians in the Thai parliament now who actually know IT, and they're all from the future forward.
It's more than that.
Huh? More than that. That's better than Myanmar, because there's so many members of parliament who refuse to even use email. So, this is the wonderful reality of ASEAN. And then we have basically the mastermind. The person who actually started this process, Emily Pradicit, the founder and director of Manushya Foundation. And, this is the first known study of cybersecurity law in an ASEAN country. So we keep hoping that the civil society and researchers in other countries that are actually undergoing this process will do a similar study. So I'm going to do ladies first, because it's been very bloke-filled this evening. So I'm going to ask Emily to share what she feels is the way forward, and then after that, Klaikong, Actually, now that you're a member of parliament, do I have to like call you Kun Klai Kong or something special?
Yes, Klai Kong is okay.
Okay. That's good. I'm relieved.
It's not
Didn't break any
honorable.
protocol.
No, please no.
Not honorable.
No,
Are you-
don't do that.
I'm pretty sure you are an honorable person. Anyway, Emily,
that's
over
great.
to you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. So when it came to making specific amendments, I mean, I listened to the previous speakers and I listened to Dr. Boom very carefully, and I don't think that the law is good enough to be applicable. I don't agree with him, because when you have so many loopholes and gaps in the law, it gives power to the government to actually misuse it and actually restrict our freedom of expression online. And when he stated that the goal of the law was to just look at critical information infrastructure, cybersecurity, as you said, is targeting everyone. It's not just targeting the government. Us as users, we're also being hacked. Us as users, we're also being victim of cybersecurity threat. And most of the time, we are being hacked or we are a victim of cybersecurity threat by government officials themselves. So the Cybersecurity Act shall actually be applied to everyone. Restrict the act just to critical information infrastructure is good, but not good enough. It also needs to protect us. So the first challenge that we have identified in the study was the broad scope and definition when it came to the Cybersecurity Act being applied for national security, economic security, martial security, and public order. In order to do that, it's very important that the Thai government comply with international human rights standards and respect the ICCPR, in particular the Article 19.3, which provide for the restriction of freedom of expression only if it's provided by the law, if it's necessary and proportionate. When it comes to this act, we don't see whether it's necessary and proportionate because we don't have clear definition of what are those security measures that is being laid out by the act. So it's really important to prioritize the individual as well in the Act. And also, as Art was saying earlier, the Data Protection Act is actually no longer protecting our data privacy and our data when it comes to cybersecurity. So we need to have data protection measures within the Act itself, not just waiting after the Data Protection Act. When it comes to the second challenge that we have identified, it was mainly towards the substantive provision when it came to the three threats. To the three cybersecurity threats. So the Act provide three cases where cybersecurity threats are being experienced. One, non-critical, second, critical, and the third one, crisis-level threat. They are not being defined. So the threats are not being defined, so we don't know what the government is talking about. We don't know what the Act is going to address, because there's no clear definition of what are those three-level acts. So that's very, very problematic. So we need clarity on all the information when it comes to the three levels of threats. We also need a clear burden of clear proof and evidence. It shouldn't be just based on suspicion, because then everything becomes suspicious. So we really need to have strong evidence and not suspicion. We need to have higher standard of proof when it comes to the three levels of threats, and obviously it needs to protect our human rights as well. The third challenge that we had identified was related to the controversial control mechanism. So Dr. Boom was talking about separation of power, but there's no real separation of power, as Art already explained earlier. And when you look at the composition of the three committees that have been created under this Act, they are members that are sitting in each of the committee. So we don't see how there is a real separation of power, and it's basically people who developed this law are the ones enforcing the law. So the government developed the law, and now they are the one enforcing the law. There's no independent expert, there's no multi-stakeholder agency that is going to monitor, that is going to overlook what the government is doing. So it's really problematic because all the power is given in the hands of the government that has developed the law. So obviously they're giving more powers to themselves. That's why there's also a lack of definition when it comes to national security and the threats. When it comes to, we also need the governments to give trainings and capacity building trainings, because it's most likely that the people who will be sitting in those committees won't have the knowledge on cybersecurity. Although Dr. Boom has told us that he was told by the minister that the committee will comprise new young people who are expert on cybersecurity. It shall also include civil society activists. It shall also include experts on digital rights and online freedom, not just cybersecurity and the technical aspect of cybersecurity. Because if those committees comprise people from the ground and marginalized communities, then people who are drafting the bill will realize that everybody is facing cybersecurity threats, and we are being hacked as well, not just critical information infrastructures. So it's really important to have capacity building. When it comes to civil society, how do we prevent cyber threats? We build our own capacity, and we work with communities to build the capacity on how they can protect themselves online and not be victim of cyber attacks. So the government should do the same. They should actually prevent by building capacity rather than punishing the others. When it comes to the fourth challenge that we identified, it's exactly what Jeff was talking about, but also Art. It's the power play and the control over critical information infrastructure. So the Act goal is supposed to protect national security and to ensure that critical information infrastructure are protected. However, there's no definition of those. So if there's no definition, we don't know what we are protecting. And if you look at the Act, it could be anything that is related to government operations online. So it's very problematic because there's no clear definition. There's no clear explanation of what critical information infrastructure is, its function. And the worst is the obligation for critical information infrastructure to report every threat. So since there's no clear definition of what a threat is about, there's no clear guidelines, and those guidelines are not going to be made public, critical information infrastructure are going to be victims of the Act. And if they don't report each threat, be it non-critical, critical, or crisis level threat, they will be punished, and they will have to pay a fine. So it's also a way for the government to enrich itself by imposing those financial penalties for each threat that is not being reported. So there's a clear burden on critical information infrastructure without clear guidelines to them on how they will identify those threats. And the fifth challenge that we have identified is clearly the lack of check and balance and lack of accountability when it comes to cybersecurity threats. The decision-making, as I explained, is in the hand of the government, who developed the law and is enforcing the law. And there's so for critical level threats, the government need to seek court permission in order to address the threat. But when it comes to crisis level threat, there's no court permission needed. The government can just access information, access computers, size computers, as long as there's a crisis level threat. But again, without clear definition and without a monitoring and oversight of what the government is doing, they could size any computers and they could consider any threat as a crisis level threat. So it's a real challenge. And so there's a real need to have a monitoring body that would comprise independent experts, that will be stakeholder, that would comprise civil society, obviously the private sector, government officials, but people who understand cybersecurity, but also the importance to protect individual rights and data privacy and online freedom. And the last challenge that we have identified in our study is the lack of remedy. So if we are victim of the misuse of the law by the government, we don't have any remedy. We are just victim and we cannot seek redress. So it's really important that whoever is being victim of the misuse of the law to be able to appeal, to be able to seek redress, and to be able to seek compensation, because at the end of the day, threats are not being defined and we don't know how the government is actually going to implement this law. So it's really important that we don't hold individual responsible for crisis level threats, for any level of threat, but that we are actually able to seek remedy when we are accused of a cyber security threat and attack.
Thanks, Emily. Actually, Emily just expanded on the very cute but also helpful infographic on page 8 of the study, which outlines the 6 key challenges, and the rest of the report goes in greater detail than that provided by Emily in terms of how those challenges play out, manifest themselves. So I'm going to now move over to Kai Kong the Honorable Klai Kong, who besides being an honorable person, is a member of Parliament also. So that's his title, and he's actually an IT expert. So he's one of the few people in Parliament who actually understand the technology, and you actually fit the bill of young, reasonable, understands technology, not a committee hack, and with fresh ideas. So can you share some fresh ideas with respect to the next steps?
Thank you, Debbie, and good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Manushya Foundation that did this document. This is a good guideline for us because Future Forward Party, we have strong intention to amend the law that we call the SLAPP law, the strategy lawsuit against people's participation law. All those include the Computer Crime Act and Cybersecurity law, and this is a good guideline. And still, I have the sentence that still down in my mind: cybersecurity as the national security, because the implement of the national security in cyberspace especially in Thailand, it seems controversial. If you see the implement of the Computer Crime Act, this is a lesson learned for us that law enforcement in the Computer Crime Act included the content of the Computer Crime Act. It's not just the data. Also, the cybersecurity law is even it's not full implementation. It's just beginning of the foundation of the committee. But we see a lot of challenge, and also the committee is also news. And also we saw some. It's like some situation. For example, in fake news about the Future Forward is like they says I myself is a head of a Future Forward cyber army. Well, this is fake news that spread on the social media. But that one is kind of like cyber army and cybersecurity is kind of some relevant. It's just like something is drawn apart to see that if have something that they can blame the Future Forward cyber team or something. That one is we see that the law is still need the amendment in the part that because this law is I think is emphasized on the side of the enforcement after the incident of the cybersecurity or cyber attack. And we need the part that talking about the standard of cybersecurity audit or cybersecurity expert, how to build, how to have some of the training or some of the capacity building, build the human resources for the cybersecurity. Right now is if we talk about the digital forensics, cybersecurity expert in Thailand is have just few institutions that have a course or some kind of the degree for that kind of the cyber expert. So that is in the parliament right now is we have full function because we just set up the committee, the common committee for many of the committee, but we have one committee for this cybersecurity and the cyber issue. The committee named the communication and telecommunication and digital for economic and society. This is include the former of the NBCT committee, Dr. Setepong Mirisuwan, and also we have a team of the digital team of the Future Forward Party, which is who expert in tech startup, blockchain, and know a lot of the digital issue in the committee. So that is one is a good start. The committee for research or for set up the way to amend the laws, and also is in future forward, because this is just finished first semester of the parliament. We will use this time until open the second semester in November for drafting the amendment. That one is I expected this one will have Thai version as well.
Yeah.
For us, it's more easier to be the guide that how we draft for the amendment version of the cybersecurity law that emphasize in the part of the protection, rather than part of the enforcement. Yeah.
So thank you. So we now have a proposal basically saying that going in a direction of punitive and restrictive laws doesn't really offer the protection that we need. It's about building capabilities amongst all the users, including the government departments, on how to prevent cyber intrusion and cyber attack. So it's and Khai Kong basically reminded us a very important point, that the law seems to be geared towards punishing cyber attack after it's happened rather than prevention. And so it's not really going to protect. The whole approach does not really build our capacity. And basically saying that all of us should learn self-defense instead of buying guns after we've been robbed. Mm-hmm. That's basically what it is. Mm-hmm. So, quite interestingly, that you see the Cybersecurity Act as part of an array of SLAPP laws, mm-hmm. And that you are going to start drafting now, between now and November.
Yeah.
So the amendment to the law. So it looks like things are moving on the civil society side and on the political party side. Are there any questions from the floor at this point? Because we're coming to the opening to the floor session, because we're caught up. We're all caught up. What I'm going to do is please identify yourself, although this person requires no introduction, but as a courtesy, please identify yourself.
Evening, I'm Pravit Rochanaprik from Council on English. I would just like to ask the representative from Future Forward Party as to how confident are you in being able to gain sufficient support in the House for such an amendment, given that the government seemingly clearly behind and in full support of the current version of the law? Thank you.
Thank you, Khun Pravit. First, we can, because we have the 80 seats, we can propose the draft of the law. But you asked about the confidence. That is a lot of strong fight. As many of the law, I mean, we campaign on amend the constitution. We propose the law about the military reserve. That also needs the public support. But at least when we propose the law, the society, the public will argue and bring this in the conversation. That one is we need, and we will have more information. Because for this time, after the cybersecurity is one of the argument cyber law, in the era of the National Legislative Assembly. So it's after is issue is released, is also so the society is don't care anymore. So, and because we still didn't see the consequence of the part that we concerns. But I think it's when we propose again, this one is will the public will come and discussing again for this issue, and then it's the consequence is up to the public support. I believe in other laws that we propose as well.
So make noise, fight apathy, get the public debate going. Any other questions? You know, we have Jeff Payne from the Asian Internet Coalition flew in from Singapore. We have Raman who flew in from New Delhi and fought turbulence to get here. So please use the opportunity to ask a question.
Good evening. My name is Bo Nathamhatana. By profession, I'm a teacher, but throughout these 5 years after the last coup, I'm also a human rights and democracy activist in Thailand. And by now, I've got 5 lawsuits against me for calling for the election. One just cleared last week. So my big question, I think for anybody who can answer it, is how we can deal with the government who issued the law for their own purpose. And by asking this question, I have to give you a bit of context. Over the last 5 years, we used to have on a Facebook fan page. The name in English is We Love Mr. Prayut. It's basically a sarcastic comedy kind of fan page. But the government did use 20 to 30 soldiers to break into the house of the admin of the fan page and then keep them in the military camp and later in jail, and after that sue them with sedition law. On the other hand, I have many cases that I have asked for the help of police when I have the fake news against me, when someone even posts the spy tape on the porn website, and when I report both to the police and to the DE ministry, they did nothing. The ministry hotline said that, okay, the site that I reported is actually illegal in Thailand, but we will take about 3 months to take the action. So when we have this Cybersecurity Act, and the detail of the act, it can sound to anyone that it doesn't add up at all. It's not reasonable. And when someone has not reasonable behavior, I look for their motivation. I think by now the motivation is clear. So that's why I asked the question, how do we deal with the government? And this act was issued before the election under the junta administration, who obviously has clear motivation, what they want to do through this law. Thank you.
Thank you. Any responses from our experts here or our experts on the panel?
Yeah. So as the politician, yeah, and we deal with the government every day, actually, and I think that the situation is different from the NCPO regime. So it's because right now it's at least we have the check and balance system and opposition party. In the parliament mechanism, yeah, we can ask, make a question to the government in each situation. Of course, yeah, as the Future Forward Party, the leader, also myself is still suspect of the Computer Crime Act. Yeah, but I think this one is not just in the system. I mean, in the parliament or in yeah, for the MP or the politician. I think it's yeah, right now it's people will see the some of the injustice or the problem of the rule of law, yeah, in Thailand, and also is I think this one, yeah, will be make some change, because of course the government or any power can stay with the face or people support. For that is when we see the problem of the rule of law or injustice is that one is if it repeat and repeat and repeat again, is I think is one day is that one is people will question more about their government, and then is yeah, I think is that one is maybe it's come to time that more impeach, I mean, with the government that why is what this situation happening in Thailand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kai Kong actually raises a very important point that at this point then our analysis of the Cybersecurity Act and the Cybercrime Act and the Data Protection Act actually conflicts with the fundamental principles of the rule of law. Most people talk about rule of law as the fair administration of justice, but the laws themselves have to protect human rights and have to be fair to everyone, and not create or contribute to a power imbalance. So this is becoming not just a question of can we open our internet and not see a certain leader's face automatically pop up or send automatic line messages to us without us wanting it, but it's actually about the fundamental rule of law as human beings. Emily, you wanted to make a response?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your question. That's also the question that we asked ourselves when we saw the Cybersecurity Act. We were like, okay, it's another tool that the government is going to misuse to silence human rights defenders, to silence human rights activists. So what can we do? We couldn't have launched this study under the previous government, obviously. We wouldn't have launched it with all the amendments and with the language that we're using in the study. We couldn't have been able to, because it's like talking to a wall. And so the reason why we chose this time is because obviously now there's a little bit more open space where we can work with parliamentarians. Before we couldn't work with anyone. Now we can work with parliamentarians. So it was important for us to, okay, we need to raise awareness about this cybersecurity bill. We need to talk with other people. We need to bring people together. We need to make clear amendments to the law that then we can give to parliamentarians like Kun Klay Kong here so that they can use it for us. Because at the end of the day, they are the only door that we have left. Even if Kun Boom told us to talk with committee members, I mean, we try to speak with government officials. We have been trying to be working with them. Besides using engagement with civil society as good stakeholders engagement, we don't see change. So it's really important for us that we engage with parliamentarians, and now that there's an opposition and a strong opposition, I think that's the only opportunity that we have now. It's to actually work with them, helping them, providing them with the information, all that we can, and raising awareness with civil society organization, building networks so that we are stronger, we can speak with a stronger voice, and our demands would be heard. Before, nobody could listen to us. But now there's more space, and now we have politicians that can channel our messages. So that's why also we launched this study at this time as well.
Thanks. We now have 3 minutes left. One final question. Or we can, is there any hands raised? Yes, one hand. Come, please step forward.
Two.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Ming Yu Ha from Amnesty International. Thank you, Emily, and your team for this event. I have a quick question for Jeff and for Naman. So given your experience in countries like Vietnam, Indonesia that you mentioned, and with Vietnam, the authorities seem to be heeding some of the comments from tech companies, businesses, both local and international. Do you have a couple of quick things to recommend most of the civil society groups in Thailand about collaborating with businesses in Thailand around trying to incorporate a more human rights or human-centered approach into Thailand's Cybersecurity Act? And Naman, I wanted to ask, with the Rights Now conference that was held recently, it's a huge global conference that Access Now hosts, were there particular learnings from that you can share with us in Thailand who are trying to strengthen the Cybersecurity Act towards greater human rights protections? Thank you.
Jeff, please step up to the podium. Don't get too comfortable there because Raman also has to speak.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've had a lot of engagement in Vietnam. Unfortunately, we've worked across many groups, whether it be civil society, business, and we still are not at a place where we want to be. Because as I mentioned about this study, this is a very kind of nice formal thing that you can hold in your hand and share with people when you engage. So this is the kind of activity I think is helpful. Most of the things that AIC does is we do it more based on the innovation that technology brings to an economy and also economic arguments. But I think that this is an opportunity, like this example, where we're working predominantly with civil society organizations, because I do think that hearing stories like we've heard here just now, I think are very important, because one of the key things that we called out, so AIC made 3 formal submissions to the Thai government on this cybersecurity bill, and we really called out the narrow definitions because they're very broadly defined, a lot of the issues and terms used in the bill, which makes it very open for opportunity to kind of abuse the powers that the bill brings. So definitely I would encourage you to work across industry groups like AIC. AIC is like a regional group. We work all across Asia, but we do have people in Thailand that focus on Thai specific issues, as we have similar in Hanoi as well. So and just opportunities to engage and meet people at events like this, I think it's a good opportunity. There's a lot of common ground. Vietnam had a much bigger pushback for the law on cybersecurity than they had in Thailand. So I think it was everyone around the world was looking at the law on cybersecurity in Vietnam because of the data localization, because of the ability to take content down without a legal court order and that kind of thing. So I don't, maybe you have some more comment you'd like to share.
Thanks, Jeff. Raman?
I won't add too much on Vietnam, just to say that I think nearly everyone's found that law to be particularly problematic. And it's had a government which has been very active on the issue, to give them credit, to at least talking to people, but it's not resulted in a positive outcome. And a lot of people are unclear about where it's going, the Vietnam cybersecurity law. And a lot of willingness to talk to people, but lack of clarity on how can it be reviewed. If not, what's the process? And a lot of this, even some of the structures that you have taken for granted here aren't necessarily there in Vietnam. So that's I'd say a negative part of that. On RightsCon, and for those who are not familiar with RightsCon, it's a conference that my organization helps organize. It started off as a Silicon Valley Human Rights and Technology Conference. The last one was in Tunisia. The next one will be in Costa Rica. It's been in the region before. It's been in Asia Pacific in Manila. And we, in fact, want to take more people there to share the experiences, because the one, I'd say, takeaway that came from RightsCon in Tunis, and Emily was there was a discussion across many Asia Pacific activists in particular, that many countries are passing cybersecurity laws in their countries. There's not enough shared experiences about what works, what doesn't work. Civil society is not active enough on cybersecurity. And I say this being critical even of my organization, need to do more. For example, just as whether it's at the international space and the human rights, the ambassador for the Netherlands mentioned the UN conversation on cybersecurity. It's happening in New York, and there are very few organizations there. We're trying to get more of them to engage. There's a regional consultation on ASEAN and in the Asia Pacific government's positions on cybersecurity in Singapore next week. And I know most people aren't familiar with that. So we're trying to engage and support more people to do that. But there are also common lessons learned. For example, about bad laws and how they harm people and how they can be fixed. Bangladesh passed a horrible Digital Security Act, which most people have seen and seen it being misused, particularly during the election period. The examples of other bad laws, but we need to also give them good suggestions about good laws. And I think we need to work on that. And the thing I'd leave you with is that civil society, I think, has often realized that cybersecurity policy frameworks are always need improvement. And even the best countries, supposedly the best countries, the United States, European member states, the EU itself, have multiple times reviewed their laws. So I think it's good for us to collect the examples of what's happening, tell our government actors that we know that you sometimes want to fix it, make it better, here is how you can do it, but also show when someone is being brought to harm because of a bad national law, bring that information together about the individuals who are being targeted due to bad agencies, or examples of failures and lack of governance, but trying to bring some of that back together. Because the one other lesson we saw from RightsCon and many groups there was the countries that have good national cybersecurity laws are ones where there is honest trust between government, law enforcement, civil society, including human rights activists, perhaps even the most extreme human rights activists, and media to talk to each other. In countries where that doesn't happen, there's clearly a problem that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Raman. We've come to the end of our time. Unless there's someone's gently edging closely. Very, very quick question. I'm going to cut you off.
Okay. I'm David. I'm a cybersecurity professional, but currently unemployed. My question is for any members of the panel who can answer. Even with the most optimistic amendments for the cybersecurity law being passed, if state agencies and law enforcement are able to, for example, obtain information from service providers without following the law or the courts, if the law enforcement can simply arrest people with no suspicion, do the amendments actually mean anything, or does it make more sense, especially here, for end users of the internet and various services to just assume by default that they are not safe and use whatever technical countermeasures are available, regardless of what the law says? Can we trust that the law on paper will actually be enforced as written, and that the protections that exist on paper will actually have meaning?
Thanks, David. Clegg-Ong?
Again,
Emily?
So the laws in the book does not, that's the reason why we're making amendments. It's actually to improve the act, because with the current act and the way that is being written, it gives full power and abuse of power to government agencies. So that's why we're making amendments. Once if Future Forward Party is able to push for the amendments, and if the bill is being reviewed, that's an ideal scenario, then we also need to look at the implementation. What Art was explaining earlier was that there is a rural decree that has to pass by May 2020 that will detail how the act will be implemented. So this is where we can push for a better monitoring and implementation, comprising different stakeholders and a multi-stakeholder approach. But the certainty of a bad law being drafted and being implemented, I think our friend who shared her experience is the perfect example of Thailand having bad laws being implemented and targeting human rights defenders. So that's why we need to amend the Cybersecurity Act. Clegg-Ong?
Okay. I just have some little add from Emily that I think at least the amendment will talking about the check and balance in the law. All those implement in the law or those not comply the law should be reported through some of the check and balance or the organization that do the monitor the human rights and also the law abuse in country. I think is those needs the more transparent to implement the law.
Thank you. But it also goes back, David, to what Klai Kong said earlier, that we all need to have a culture of building our own capability to protect ourselves from cyber attacks. And we can't really depend on one agency or one government to do that. Everybody has to, even government departments themselves have to build their own capacity and capability to protect data and their infrastructure. So on that point, it's been a very rich and well-textured evening. Thank you everyone for sitting through 2 hours. Thank you Raman from Access Now, Jeff from Asian Internet Coalition, Art from Thai Netizen Network, they've run off, and Dr. Boon. Maybe they're out in the street fighting. Maybe we really had a cage fight and we missed out. Thank you, Klai Kong from Future Forward Party. And thank you to all the hosts, the staff and the leadership of the FCCT, Thai Netizen Network, Access Now, Kingdom of Netherlands, Manushya Foundation for actually doing all the real work, and FIDH. Oh yeah, I'm Secretary General, so I'm thanking myself. Thank you everyone. Most importantly, thank you everyone for being here, being engaged, and now we know what to do. Thank you.